Hello and welcome back to The Greatest Story, an introduction to the Bible. This is lesson 4 entitled Getting Started. Today we will be looking at the Old Testament books of Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. Again, The Greatest Story, an introduction to the Bible, and this is lesson number 4. The keys for today's story are that with God leading, the Israelites fight to obtain the land God promised them. But unsettling times continue, and the Israelites break their promise to keep God central in their lives. Therefore, God appoints judges to help guide the people through tough times. And finally, we will meet Ruth, a Gentile who is a non-Jew and is an example of love and faithfulness that finds herself in Jesus' family tree. In our last lesson, it ended with God commanding Moses to turn over leadership of the Israelites to Joshua. Under Joshua, the people end their wilderness wandering and cross over into the Promised Land. These next 3 books begin a section in the Bible known as the historical books because they tell the story of Israel in this new land. It becomes very clear very quickly that things will go well for the people when they follow God's laws. But watch out if they don't. Our scripture reading for today comes from Ruth, chapter 2, verse 12, found on page 445 of your Lutheran Study Bible. Ruth is a small book, very easy to read, and we're going to be reading from chapter 2, verse 12. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Again, if you read the entire book of Ruth, you will have a greater understanding of that verse. And now please pray with me. Faithful God, it is easy for us to turn to you when we are going through tough and uncertain times. Still, we know you desire devotion no matter what our circumstances may be. Empower us to stick by you the way you faithfully stick by us, even when we get rebellious and turn from you as the Israelites did. Help us to know that you are our refuge throughout all the days of our lives. Amen. Here's a background file. This is the northern part of Palestine. If you're reading in Joshua or Judges, you will find some of the locations on this map. You'll be able to see what they're talking about there. Now the map is so large that this is the southern part of Palestine, found on page 2101. So you've got 2100 and 2101 show you the entire land of Palestine, where you will find locations referenced in the books of Joshua and Judges. The Israelites soon learned that getting settled in the Promised Land is actually pretty unsettling, because other people already live there. That means the Israelites have to invade the land that God had given them to take control of it. Joshua, chapters 1 through 12, describes their invasion and eventual occupation of the land promised to their ancestor Abraham and his family. Things tend to go well when the Israelites are faithful to God and follow God's lead, but not so well when they don't. And they soon discover even the faithlessness of one person can affect everybody. The importance of the blessings and curses that come from obedience and disobedience winds throughout the historical books. Because this is also a predominant theme in Deuteronomy, these books are known as part of a longer work known as a Deuteronomistic history that runs all the way through 2 Kings. The book of Joshua ends with Joshua's parting words prior to his death. He reminds the Israelites their mantra should be, "Remember the covenant." The book of Judges speaks about the Israelites' life in Canaan without a king. They have no central leader to unite them. Without a ruler, the people get themselves into big trouble and begin worshiping local gods, violating their commitment to the God who has been faithful to them. So God lifts up and empowers people called judges to assist the people when they need it. You might think of the judges as superheroes of the Old Testament, who performed impossible feats because they were blessed by God to protect and save God's people. Ruth is a story of love and faithfulness that appears like a glimmer of sunshine amid all the turmoil of the previous two books. It begins with the decision of Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi to return to her native Bethlehem after the death of her husband and two sons. Even though Ruth will be a foreigner, she sticks by Naomi, refusing to let her go it alone. Ruth finds love with Boaz, a relative of Naomi, who recognizes Ruth's traits of faithfulness and devotion. They marry, and from their family line rise both King David and Jesus of Nazareth. While dreadfully violent at times, the book of Joshua is a reminder to Israel that God is their ultimate leader. Their role is to follow. When they don't, bad things happen. It is only with God's help that God's chosen people can secure the land of Canaan. Some may struggle with this part of the story, in which the land's indigenous people had to be defeated and sometimes massacred in order for Israel to live in the land promised to them. The ongoing struggle over this land continues even today. Clearly, the stories reported in Joshua and other Old Testament books were written from the perspective of the Jewish people. The struggle for this land is described from their particular point of view. Christians receive the Hebrew Scriptures as part of this complete faith story. At the same time, we can see many examples in the Old Testament of God calling God's people to do justice and seek the best for their neighbor. We are also reminded of the continuing theme of rebellion. Even though the people promised Joshua that they would renew and uphold their part of God's covenant, they continued their stubborn and self-serving ways. They turned away from God's laws and teaching, even to the point of worshiping other gods. The book of Judges shows again how God stands by his people through tough times by lifting up the judges to assist them. Joshua and Judges were likely written during a later time, when the people were facing the threat of invasion by foreign powers. The prophets would interpret this threat as God's punishment for acts of faithlessness. But the books also provided messages of hope that their circumstances could be reversed if only they got their act together and once again began to uphold their part of God's covenant. God listens to God's people through their prayers, both then and now. God desires faithfulness, both then and now. All three of these books remind us to expect the unexpected when God is at work in the world. Samson, a wisecracking smart aleck, becomes a judge to help God's people. Ruth is a beautiful story of love and devotion that explains how a faithful, non-Jewish woman became the great-grandmother of King David, the beloved King of Israel. In Matthew's Gospel, we discover that Jesus comes from David's family line, so he is connected to Ruth as well. This story shows that God loves and works through the Gentiles too, and that ordinary people can have extraordinary places in God's story of salvation. The death of Moses ends one major chapter in the story of the Israelite people, but a new chapter is about to begin. With God's mighty strength showing the way, it is now up to a man named Joshua to lead Israel across the Jordan River and into the promised land. God continues to be faithful to God's promise. Entering the land was not going to be a piece of cake. Israelites would have to fight their way into a land already occupied. The entry into Canaan began with a spy mission to Jericho. There, a prostitute named Rahab saved the spies, who were able to return to Joshua with good news about a land that was Israel's for the taking. Now all that had to be done was to get all the Israelites across the river safely. And just as God had done at the Red Sea earlier, God parted the waters of the Jordan River so the people could cross on dry ground. After marking their crossing with an altar, the people headed straight to Jericho. Here the priest took the lead, blowing trumpets and circling around the city walls. With the loudest shouting and commotion the people could muster, the walls fell on the seventh day. Only Rahab and her family were spared. As Israel moved forward, it was critical that the people obeyed everything that God told them. If even one of them did not obey, the punishment was brought upon them all. This was the situation when Israel failed at their first attempt to take the city of Ai. Israel's next swipe at Ai was a bloody and destructive one that left the city in a heap of ruins. Joshua led the people to conquer a large territory from Goshen in Egypt to northern Canaan, taking many kings and their lands. Despite the failures of Joshua and the people, God was determined to lead them forward. Now began a complicated process of dividing land among the 12 tribes. The priestly tribes of Levi had responsibilities throughout the entire nation, and so they were not given a specific geographical place. Refugee cities were set up for any Israelite who accidentally caused the death of someone, and it was to preserve their safety until a fair trial could be held before the entire community of faith. This is a map of the 12 tribes, and it shows the difference in what the tribes were allotted after the division of the land. You'll notice that some of the tribes got a great deal of square miles, others did not. You can find this map on page 2102 of your Lutheran Study Bible. At the death of Joshua, Israel entered a new era of governance when God did not appoint a new leader for the nation, but left the tribes to fend for themselves. Even though they had confidently promised to serve God prior to Joshua's death, without the leadership of a Joshua or a Moses, the situation among the Israelites became very unsettled. Some tribes managed well, while others did not. Some of the people began to worship the gods of the Canaanites. An extreme survival test had begun, as the people living in the land made life very difficult for the Israelites. God remained faithful, however, despite the many problems the Israelites brought on themselves. To help them face numerous threats, God raised up a cadre of leaders called judges. These were cult heroes who organized the people to defend themselves against their foes. Deborah, Gideon, and Samson were among the string of heroic leaders who helped save the people from defeat. Their stories were filled with all kinds of interesting and unusual battle techniques. Regardless of how successful a particular judge might be, when each one died, the people lapsed into even greater sins than before. And this is on page 417 of your Lutheran Study Bible. This is a list of the judges in Israel. Again, on page 417 of your Lutheran Study Bible. And just when we were about to tire of the shenanigans of people of Israel, the story takes a pleasant diversion into the realm of love. The book of Ruth engages us in an intimate and delightful story about a Moabite woman named Ruth who marries one of the sons of Naomi, an Israelite from Bethlehem. Tragedy falls upon this family as Naomi's husband and her 2 sons die. As Naomi plans to return to Bethlehem, Ruth binds herself to her mother-in-law in a unique act of love and faithfulness. By making such a choice, Ruth has taken the more difficult route. Not only is she leaving her Moabite family behind, but she is also going to Israel, where she will be a foreigner and a widow with no one to look out for her survival. Fortunately, Boaz, one of Naomi's husband's relatives, raised grain. Israelite law allowed for the poor to collect any leftovers from the newly harvested fields. And so it was that Boaz took notice of Ruth and made a deal to marry her. Ruth and Boaz had a son named Obed, who had a son named Jesse, who had a son named David, who became the most famous king of Israel. From David's family line came a man named Joseph, who married a young girl named Mary, and they had a son whose name was Jesus. And now we're going to look at the story with Joe Castillo-Sandard again. And please look at page 40 of your participant guide and contemplate the questions that are there as you watch this particular Sandard. And now we'll take a look at Psalm 47. 47 is found on page 899 in your Lutheran Study Bible. Psalm 47 is a hymn of praise and an enthronement psalm celebrating God's rule over all nations. The psalmist praises God, who has subdued the nations for the sake of Israel and their inheritance of a promised land. The people are encouraged to sing praises to God of all creation, a God who has met the promises made to Abraham. And Psalm 47 on page 899 reads, "Clap your hands, all you peoples, shout to God with loud songs of joy. For the Lord, the Most High, is awesome, a great king over all the earth. He subdued peoples under us and nations under our feet. He chose our heritage for us, the pride of Jacob, whom he loves. God has gone up with a shout, the Lord with the sound of a trumpet. Sing praises to God, sing praises. Sing praises to our God, sing praises. For God is the King of all the earth, sing praises with a psalm. God is king over the nations. God sits on his holy throne. The princes of the peoples gather as the people of God of Abraham. For the shields of the earth belong to God. He is highly exalted." Now we're going to move on to Psalm 46. Psalm 46, of course, is on the previous page, 898. Psalm 46 is a hymn of praise celebrating God's sure and steady presence through all turmoil. The psalmist describes both cosmic and political threats that God's people face and how God is present and immovable throughout all dangers. God will bring peace to the nations and to the hearts of the people. God is indeed their refuge. Psalm 46, beginning on page 898. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of the city, it shall not be moved. God will help it when the morning dawns. The nations are in an uproar, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come behold the works of the Lord. See what desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars to cease at the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. And thus ends Psalm 46. For this lesson, you are encouraged to read the scenes on pages 34 and 39 of your participant guide. You'll see there are 5 scenes there on those pages, and they will help you better understand this lesson. Next time, we'll move on to lesson number 5. We'll see the settled but divided tribes as they come together under the rule of one king, and then later on they split into 2 kingdoms. We'll see that in lesson number 5. In preparation for that lesson, please read the following introductions in your Lutheran Study Bible. We will continue to look at the historical books with the introduction on page 361 and 362, and then we'll be looking at 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st Chronicles, and you can see the pages there that are the introductions to those books in your Lutheran Study Bible. As usual, if I can be of any help to you, please email me at that address, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I normally check my email every day, so you should hear back from me within 24 hours. There is also some optional reading before next time. There is a reading from the book of Joshua, 2 from the book of Judges, and the entire book of Ruth. You can find those readings on page 41 of your participant guide. So if you look back at your participant guide, you're going to get a lot of help there. God bless you all. Be safe, and we'll see you next week.